To the BBC Docs download session. This is the second one we've done, and we're hoping it's going to become more of a regular event. So welcome. We know that it's been a really difficult year for freelancers and continues to be a really difficult time for freelancers, so it just is a really lovely opportunity to be able to look at one particular film and explore the craft of that film and take a sort of deep dive into how it was made and why it was made and all the sort of things that the filmmakers were thinking about, to really just enjoy our craft and sort of remember why we all work in this industry, even though it's bloody difficult at the moment. So, on our panel, so my name's Emma Loach, I'm one of the commissioners in the Docs department. On our panel at the end we have Morgan Matthews, executive producer. Next to him is Benedict Sanderson, cinematographer and co-director of the film. Then Meg Inman, producer and co-director, and Otto Burnham, editor. So welcome. So, before we get going on this film, I thought it'd be interesting to hear how you all started off in telly before you were the established, brilliant filmmakers that you are now. What was your first job? How did you get in? Morgan, how did you get in?
I shouldn't have sung, yeah. I did a degree in film, and I managed to get a 2-week contract as a junior researcher at Lion Television, as it was, working on a pilot for Paddington Green. I don't know, I doubt many people remember that, but it was a sort of docu-soap of the era, and then at the end of each week they just kept saying to me, "Oh, can you do another week? Can you do another week?" But it was partly because I could shoot, and it was at the advent of DV cameras, DV tape cameras, adapted by the BBC sound department, the little box on, so you could shoot on these fairly domestic cameras and use them for broadcast, and so I think that's why I got the job.
You were one of the boys who could shoot. And Ben, what about you?
Well, slightly similarly, I was doing a postgrad in print journalism, and I quit that. I realised I wanted to do something more visual. Managed to get do some work experience at the BBC, making a lot of cups of tea and sort of what not to wear and that sort of thing. And then I quite quickly quit that and joined Procam and was a camera assistant on Peep Show. So jumped around a lot at the beginning. Yeah.
So both sort of camera skills got you in.
Yeah, I think so.
Sort of you know, when you used to use yellow pages for research, that was the role.
Meg, what about you?
So I speak Japanese. So one of my first jobs was working as a fixer for Japanese TV shows that were filming in the UK and in Europe. Mm-hmm. But these Japanese TV shows were, I don't know if you've seen many Japanese TV shows, but they're quite bonkers. So I was going around doing bizarre things. At one point I was stopped by undercover MI6 police cars whilst we were trying to film a stupid sketch outside MI6 which we had no permission for or anything. We were doing all, it was, I had a few wild months doing random Japanese TV shows in London.
Fantastic.
I started my career interning at a post-production facility in Los Angeles, dealing in a kind of uncompressed, tapeless recording environment, like one of the first in the world. Mm-hmm. Technology was used on Zodiac, a little film you might have seen. Anyway, it was an amazing opportunity, and to keep me humble, the boss of the company would have me cook his breakfast every morning, and he liked fried eggs, and he liked them one after the next.
I didn't know this was a service you provided us.
He was asked the right question.
Fantastic. Excellent. So after that, it was just a short hop until you were making Atomic People. Because it's not been out yet, I wonder whether we could watch it's the first 4 minutes or so to give you all a flavour. Now this film exists, we can all sort of think, thank God this exists, this film, it feels very important. But why, Morgan, what was the inspiration for first pitching it? What was your thinking behind that?
Well, I suppose, it was kind of around the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and We were seeing, Putin making nuclear threats, and that felt very scary, to me. And also as a child of the 80s, growing up in the 80s during the Cold War, and being, genuinely kind of terrified that a nuclear war might break out then, and going on bomb marches and reading When the Wind Blows, and being really terrified, and just seeing this kind of fear, I suppose, bubble up again, and it made me start thinking about the bombs, and then also just the fact that we've not heard these voices. I just couldn't think of a single film that covered the experience of the Japanese survivors from their perspective, exclusively from their perspective. In conversation with Claire Silly at the time, and I think felt the same. It was just, well, why haven't? And I remember the first time we spoke about it. It's like, why haven't we heard? It's such a momentous event in history that has even more kind of prescience now. And that it turned out that when we started speaking to the survivors, they also felt that because of what was happening in the world. Also combined with the fact that they are getting very old. And they feel that when their voices are gone, that there won't be this first-hand experience to tell the world what happened to them and to warn the world as well. So I think it was a combination of all of those things, and it just felt right that we should be telling this story now, and that's when we embarked on making the film.
And you'll see when you watch the film, it's a film with incredible people in it. The interviewees are astonishing. Meg, how do you go about finding those people who are quite old, the other side of the world? What was your process in finding them?
So, in Japan, this story of the bombs dropping is obviously a really, really important historical event. So we study at school, and we do hear of hibakushas and people giving their testimonies and all of that, but from trying to get in touch with those people from the other side of the world was practically a challenge, because as Morgan said, all the hibakushas were children at the time, so the youngest hibakusha would have been in their 80s today, so they're not on social media, a lot of them are not using internet, so trying to get in touch with them was first of all a big challenge. I could kind of see there were newspaper clippings or videos, but like, how do I actually get to them? So that was one challenge. One way we approached this was getting in touch with organisations that had already had a good network or relationship with hibakushas, because another thing I was really aware of was obviously when you're asking these hibakushas to speak of their experiences, it's a really big thing we're asking them to talk about. It's years of trauma, but also later on we'll talk about this, but they weren't allowed, lots of hibakusha weren't allowed to talk about their experiences for many years, so I felt very sensitive. I knew it was a very sensitive, delicate thing to talk about, so I didn't want to just barge in and say, hi, we're just making a film. I really wanted our hibakushas to feel like they could talk to us if they wanted to, but also say, no, I'm not actually into that, and I felt like having a mediator in between would help. So I got in touch with a lot of organisations and explained our film, and was introduced to quite a few people via that way. But also what was interesting was our project kind of caught word of mouth in some places too. So one of the hibakushas, it was you saw him. He's the gentleman with the voice box. He actually found out about our project and reached out to me via a school teacher. So that was really nice, sort of like organic relationships being built from the other side of the world.
Our next clip actually, I think, will sort of show why it was hard to find some people in the, sort of the culture of silence around this. Should we show that? How did that sort of culture of silence affect how you wanted to make the film, sort of, you know, in terms of the form of the film? And how did and how did the contributors feel about talking to a Western audience, the fact that this was going to be a film for the UK?
So I'll answer the second question first. So I think the survivors in Japan are called Hibakusha, so that's why I was saying Hibakusha earlier. The survivors, in terms of them speaking to a Western audience and speaking in, they knew that they were speaking to the BBC. They were really honoured actually, and a lot of them feel like they are running out of time to tell their story. Like they all have this incredible sense of duty and to tell their story and to eradicate nuclear weapons, and it is their daily mission to fight for that. So for them to speak to us, I think they thought it was not easy. Like you'll see in the interviews, it wasn't. There are really hard moments for them still to this day, 80 years later. It's not an easy topic for them, of course. But I think they knew how important it was, and what the experience they went through is an important experience for humanity. So they were really all incredibly cooperative and about the film. With regards to form, maybe Ben, is that you guys?
It strikes me that there's something about the sort of the silence that they lived in,
right,
and how this film is quite unmediated. You haven't used any VO. It's very much just they're telling us.
Yeah, I think that from the very start that was the kind of style and we were going for, wasn't it? Which was there wasn't going to be a voice of God or someone narrating. It was.
Or hear from the pilots, perhaps. We didn't want it to be like the definitive take on the bomb. We felt, I think, like it had to be simpler and it should be just their voices. I think that was sort of right from the beginning, wasn't it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, and I think that there are some Hibakusha who are kind of easier to reach and are more used to speaking about their experiences. And then there were some who hadn't done so much of that at all. And what Meg did brilliantly was find those people as well who were ready to tell their stories. And again, for reasons that maybe time is running out or because of what's happening in the world or a combination of. Found a lot of wonderful characters and arranged this trip to go and meet them. And I think had 17 people lined up to see over a period of 2 weeks.
At least
2 weeks. In Hiroshima, Nagasaki and Tokyo. And this was meant to be a kind of a recce. And then we were sort of working out, okay, we might only be able to afford to go to Japan twice, maybe 3 times. Sometimes when you meet people, if, as Meg did, had spoken to people as much as she could in advance or communicated with them, and then, the big trip and come all the way from England to meet them, and people are going to want to talk. Not always, but I think we know as documentary makers that sometimes those first conversations that you have are actually really special, and sometimes you have to wait a bit longer and build up the relationship and get somewhere deeper. But to not be able to capture those first conversations, that felt like a real missed opportunity. And I know if I was in that situation and I didn't have a camera, I would be, I'd feel frustrated. So that's when we got Ben on board as well. At quite short notice, and Ben and Meg went out
3 days before
with his kit to go out and to shoot. And it was a case of if it feels appropriate, we'll get the camera out. If it doesn't, that's fine. But we've got it there, in case. And because it was also in a more intimate setting in people's homes, we knew that we weren't necessarily going to be able to go to their homes again because of the way that they were spread out, and that the second shoot was likely to be more a master interview shoot where we sat down and spoke to people, with a crew in the same locations for a long period of time, but in their homes, they have what's around them, they have their mementos, their photographs, their maps, the documents, the keepsakes. And again, you get that sense of intimacy that you get, with a small team, and I think that really worked and contributed towards the film as well.
It's quite unusual now to not do a 3-hour research phone call on, before you go, and so that sort of finding out finding out new things from your people that you're interviewing as you're filming. How was that? I mean, did it feel exciting? Was it scary?
But it was a fact-finding trip, wasn't it?
It was a mixture. Some people I managed to do, long Zooms. Some of these 18, 19-year-olds are on Zoom, and so with those amazing people, I managed to do these 2-hour-long research calls.
Right.
But some people don't do email, or I couldn't even really speak to them on the phone because they were hard of hearing, and those people were really, it was, thrilling's the wrong word. It's you don't know what what experience you're going to have, but it's going to be extremely intimate, and people are going to be letting you into their homes, which is a very it's a big step in Japanese culture, I'd say, and also talking about something so traumatic and so difficult, but a lot of people are just like kind of, I found, like wanting to tell us their story, and it was a real privilege every time we heard their stories. It was a real privilege.
And I should say Meg was pregnant at this point, quite heavily pregnant, and I can absolutely recommend, if you need to do a really busy shoot and get a lot organised, ask a heavily pregnant woman to organise it, because you got them going to...
Yeah, it was nuts schedule.
Nuts.
Yeah.
Whizzing
Nuts
around in
schedule.
taxis, and 3 people per day.
As you said, Morgan, having a deadline
Yeah.
like that was really...
Well, yeah, put a bit of pressure on it, but it also meant that when we did do the main block of filming or the interviews, and Meg wasn't able to travel at that point because you were like 8 months or something.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
But Meg still did the majority of the interviews, but via Zoom. So we had a setup with Ben in Japan, and obviously, working with Meg on those questions. And then a couple of other producers, Japanese-based producers who Ben also worked with, who then did the other interviews. But yeah, Meg still managed to do them.
Heavily pregnant. Yeah. So what's amazing is through those interviews, you did manage to get the sort of absolutely feeling of an unmediated, minute-by-minute storytelling of what happened nearly 80 years after the event. And the next clip I think we're going to watch is where they take us through the day of the blast. And I think you'll see what we mean. Ben, tell us a bit about what it's like when you realise this is a film, this is a testimony film, these interviews are my film, our film. How do you go about interviewing someone, or listening to interviews or filming them when you don't understand what they're saying?
Good question. I mean, on the recce initially, it was just me and Meg, so we talked. Sometimes we knew a bit about what they were going to say, and other times it was purely finding out the testimony. So, and Meg would turn, and I was filming, but obviously not understanding what was happening, and it's not like French or Spanish or Italian. It's just I couldn't pick up any words, and often the body language doesn't necessarily tell you what they're saying either. So that was a very interesting experience, and Meg would turn and translate to me occasionally, but also you don't want to break the flow of someone, particularly if they're reliving a traumatic event. So that was that. I got the gist of it, and afterwards we worked out exactly what they said, and we crafted the questions together. In terms of actually practically answering it, it was quite an interesting setup actually, and it came from Meg had done Japanese English films before, so we really carefully crafted the questions based on the sort of the recce and pre-interviews, and then actually we would either Meg would ask the questions via Zoom down an Interrotron sort of mirror box set up, because we felt like that kind of first person testimony had to be sort of straight to our audience, it had to use a mirror box, or one of the because it was a pretty drastic time difference, so sometimes it was just would be in the middle of the night for you.
Yeah,
right?
it was like 2 p.m. in Japan was my 4 a.m.
Yeah. And how we did it actually was the producers had the list of questions. They would sit and ask the questions. I would be usually in a different room, which I felt like really unnerved by. I'd never done that in an interview, and I thought an interview is all about building a relationship with people. And I did have a chance to do that, obviously, because I was shooting all the Actuality. But actually what it meant is if we needed to, if someone didn't quite answer a question, or it felt a bit like we needed to ask a follow-up, I would immediately WhatsApp the producer, or Meg, who was answering the questions, and that was the quickest, most effective way to do it, but without disturbing the interviewee. So, and sorry, just so I understood what was happening, we had someone doing a live translation. So it was a really sort of complex setup, but it worked really well, and you sort of worked out how to do that, I think, from
the
previous productions. Yeah.
And tell us a bit about the Actuality, because I know you had to rethink what you were going to do with the Actuality a bit, didn't you? With the age of the...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the eldest contributor is 99. She must be 100 now, actually.
It's 100 on July the 1st.
Oh, there you go. Okay. And so it's Japan, so people are generally a lot fitter, than other parts of the world. But equally, they're slightly limited what they could do. I mean, he is 91, 92, that said, and we did go up to the top of the city and look out. So we checked they were healthy enough, and we filmed some great scenes with them, and we took them back to places. But we had to be quite careful with doing that, obviously, and we, sort of very carefully checked they were okay as we went and did that. But yeah, you are slightly limited with what you can do with people, so we knew it had to be driven by testimony. Had this idea about, they're all children at the time, apart from the 99-year-old lady, so the looking up in the sky, which is a sort of thing that we returned to, just came from, we were thinking, well, what else can we do with these people after we've done the interview? And so there's a lot of shots of them looking up in the air, and that sort of turned out to be quite a powerful kind of motif that goes through it. And then other than that, they are going back to locations or they're in their home. But it's amazing, like Morgan said, the things that they had in their home that would spark kind of memories they could talk about. So those are sort of elements of the film, quite simple, but
I think there's also that sense that we realised quite early on that it wasn't going to be a majority Actuality observational film, and previously at Lino we'd made a film also for the BBC, The Last Survivors, which told the stories of some of the last survivors of the Holocaust, and that, whilst there were interviews in it, was more observational and followed narratives over a longer period of time, because we had a longer period of time to make that film, and Arthur Carey, who directed it, was also making another film at the same time for us, and it was UK based, and so we could stretch out the schedule, and Arthur also, shot it. So we were able to do that, but we realised with Atomic People we weren't going to be able to do that, because we can't just pop over to Japan to follow a story of somebody else, somebody, and then the same for somebody else, and whilst we looked at those narratives, and there are those moments in the film when people are doing things that are actually quite significant, and they're interspersed, with the interviews. But yeah, we realised that wasn't going to be the body of the film, and that we were working towards those interviews as the main structure, to create the main structure, an overarching narrative of the film.
There's also a difference, isn't there, in terms of the audience's knowledge of this event, and in some ways that's what's so sad, that this is the first film, because the first film you have to just tell the story and do the testimony, and then you'd hope there'd be films that will follow, but we're running out of time, as you say. I think what people will see from the film is that the interviews you did and the Actuality are absolutely beautiful, and as well as that, the editing, Otto, is phenomenal. The craft of editing in terms of the pictures and the sound, you saw some of the sound editing in that last clip, is absolutely exceptional. And I just wondered what it's like for you. We heard from Ben doing the interviews in a language you don't speak. What was it like for you cutting the entire film in a language you don't speak?
It was tricky.
Yeah.
It was tricky, but it was translated very well. I don't speak Japanese. Obviously, all the rushes had been translated. And subtitled, so I could sit and watch the interview and kind of and understand what everyone was saying. I think at the beginning of the process, me and Ben had obviously talked about the project and all the rest of it, but we kind of separated, and I went to my kind of, you know, attic, kind of whatever, at home, my little like safe space, and watched 15, 16, 17 interviews, all of them sort of anywhere between 2 hours and usually more like 3 or 4 or 5, and just went through my normal process, which is kind of trying to follow like the emotional cadence of like what everyone's stories were. I mean, like we knew there was certain beats of the story that we wanted to hit, and we planned it out roughly chronologically because that made the most sense. But even though it was an unusual experience reading a story and kind of like following the tone of people's voices at the same time, and that like informed a lot of the decisions that we made. And, you know, we kind of met afterwards, and we were, you know, sending each other excited little WhatsApps about certain bits of people's interviews, and it informed a lot of the editorial decisions we made in terms of just taking on that, I mean, obvious emotional ride, and obviously enjoyed is the wrong word, but, you know, some of the, you know, I was upset several times listening to the interviews because, like, shocked at like how vivid and kind of violent some of the like memories were, and how like emotionally like traumatic their experiences were. And they really, it was like really upsetting at times working on it, if I'm really honest. But incredibly felt. You know, I took the project because I know Ben, we worked together, and, you know, I love his work, and we worked very well together. But I also took it because I knew that I was going to encounter testimony which would feel really special, and it was what these guys captured was incredibly moving. I mean, it wasn't just traumatic. Like, part of what is so incredible about the Hibakusha is that there's a joy and a freeness and a power and a spirit and a fight that I think probably took a long time to emerge because of the fact that they weren't allowed to speak for so long, but perhaps bottling that up for so long meant that, you know, it became what it did. But what I'm trying to say is that there was actually a lot of joy within the interviews as well, and a lot of not just dark stuff.
Yeah, which was, I realised, your job to find, and I sort of think, you know, you were in a small room surrounded by incredibly upsetting archive, incredibly upsetting testimony, and I think the next clip really shows how both you and Ben are constantly thinking about the audience and sort of working out how to tell this story for an audience sat at home watching, and sort of almost, you know, how you make it bearable. Should we have a look at the next clip? I think that clip really shows what the craft of what you both did in the edit in terms of taking us to somewhere really difficult and bringing it back. How important is that to you, and how do you work that out in the edit?
Sustain all of the horror, and there's a lot of beauty within the story, I think.
I mean, the way we sort of laid it out obviously takes lots of iterations and experimentation, but it was sort of our experience of meeting that couple. I have to say, like, when we first met them, they were so joyful, and you thought they would make perfect parents, and then, but we knew that they decided not to have children. They were really open about that, and it was really heartbreaking, wasn't it, when we first, and you could sort of see within Keiko, and that was actually something, you know, even though I didn't understand, I could just, you know, maybe translating a bit, I could just see that they still wrestle with that decision, but it was an, you know, not to give it away obviously, but like it's an absolute lottery whether some people had kids and they were fine, and then but there were very high rates of leukemia because of sort of secondary effects from the bomb. So you know, and the film explores all those different sort of eventualities. So yeah, I think in a way we just sort of laid it out as based on our sort of experience of them, and they were amazingly open about it, weren't they? You know, and absolutely full of joy and talking about it. But when he took those pictures out, that was quite a surprise, wasn't it? You know, and obviously throughout the film, we kind of wondered to what extent should we show things like that, or there's a lot of horrific imagery, and I think we were quite careful and picked our moments to do it, but obviously there's times when you feel like you should to illustrate the point they're talking about.
So we should talk about duty of care to the contributors, because obviously the trauma these people have gone through is immeasurable and unfathomable. And it's interesting how, I guess, when we had that conversation, what I brought to it, and Lynn Jones, who's our editorial policy advisor, brought to it, and what we thought, for our Western view, what the duty of care should be, was very different to your thoughts, Meg. Do you want to just talk a bit about that?
Sure. So I think what we were talking about was, given that we're going to be asking our contributors to be talking about some of the most traumatic, difficult experiences that they'd had in their lives and experience that they had as children, and many people lost their family members, their parents, their brothers and sisters, just unimaginable losses. And so we were talking about what kind of support we could offer or should offer, and therapy and all of that, I think. And one discussion we had was that actually offering therapy to these contributors might not be actually the appropriate thing to do, for a few reasons. One is therapy in Japan is still quite taboo, and it's not something that, especially this generation, offering it to them. I'm speaking from my grandmother's perspective, experience with my grandmother as well. It's not necessarily seen as like not maybe a respectful or polite thing, and so we had a discussion about whether that's something that would be an appropriate thing to do, and whether they would actually see it as something that they needed, and also not to, it's been 80 years, they've processed it in their own way. Not to say that they don't need therapy, but they have processed it in their own ways. From my experience, when talking to them, that's how I'd felt. So yeah, that was one sort of maybe anomaly of duty of care that we came across, and we talked about quite a lot.
But I think that, there were cases where you did offer that, and because we wanted to explore that as well, and I think the sort of the concern being that the implication, if you offer therapy, that somebody might be unwell,
Right.
But,
yeah, it was sort of kind of laughed in my face a little bit. Sort of like, why? Yeah, it was. Like I said, this is something that we offer, and it was often just like, what are you talking about? Like, why would I need that? What are you talking about? And so, yeah, it was just like, where did that come from? What kind of solution is that? Kind of, yeah, it was just complete left field, like offering to them. So that was quite interesting.
But there were lots of follow-up calls that you made, so they're always after the interview, calling them, speaking to them, all that, as well.
The duty of care the duty of care I felt, and we all felt, was making sure that they were kept in the loop of the filmmaking process, and in the loop of what was going on. So we didn't just go in, barge in, do interviews and leave. Like, we shouldn't do that anyway, but especially with these intimate stories that they told us and how they'd opened up to us. It was, for me anyway, I feel like we built a relationship with them and with Kiyomi and some of the contributors, especially we went back to more than once, especially. It was, so that's something we've been doing, and even the past couple of weeks I've been back in touch with the contributors to let them know that we're here premiering, showing our film, and they were all ecstatic about the news, and telling them that this is going to be broadcasting in summer, and they're just all absolutely over the moon to hear that their voices are going to be reaching all of you, and hopefully even further. And I think that's been the most important thing, is making sure that they're involved still.
Fantastic. We've got our amber light people, which we know what that means. We could carry on chatting for a long time, but it would be really nice to have some questions from the audience. I think there's a mic going around. if you want to grab a mic. Do you want to put your hands up? Who wants to? This.
Thank you. Afternoon. Is there an intention to broadcast it in Japan?
That's a good question. I mean, we'd love to see it broadcast in Japan. We did have a conversation relatively early on with an exec at NHK who Meg knows. I think there was maybe from him like a question like why would we show this film that's made by you guys in Japan, and we've had lots of films about Hibakusha in Japan, none of which have been shown over here, obviously. But that was at a really early stage, and I think we felt that what the guys were achieving and what the material that they were getting was very different to films that might have been seen in Japan. But we felt that we just, rather than telling people that, and saying it's going to be different, that we just needed to make the film. And then, if there is interest, we'll share it with NHK, and it would be great if it was shown in Japan as well. And I'm really interested to know what a Japanese audience would make of it as well. Because I think that there was also a sense of what we talked about, Meg, that the Western version of the story of the bombs is a certain kind of version that is that differs from what is the stories that are told in Japan, and there's still a sense in the West that this was the right thing to do because it ended the war. Arguable whether that was what ended the war, but there is that perception, so I think there was almost a bit of mistrust that we felt in terms of giving this story, or not giving the story, but us choosing to tell this story and how we might do it. And I think we just wanted the film to speak for itself, rather than saying, oh, well, we're not going to do it, oh no, but we're not going to do it like that. And so, yeah, hopefully, I mean, if there's anyone from NHK in the audience, come to the premiere tonight and watch the film.
Anyone else?
Yeah, it looks amazing, and what's really shocking is just how current it feels, and really current right now. I wanted to ask, how much were you aware of the silencing of the victims before you started?
I think I was aware of it. I'd learned about it at school, but I didn't realise to the extent of how much they were silenced. And it was that there was a press code. Now, I kind of thought maybe it was just hush, hush, let's not talk about it because it's not a nice thing to talk about and we don't want to be discriminated. But to know that actually there was a 10-point press code where you were not allowed to talk about certain things to do with the war, including the bomb, and you couldn't publish anything, and that letters were censored, I had no idea. I don't think any of this.
I had absolutely no idea. I mean, it's I think we know all about, certainly growing up in the UK, we learned a lot about the sort of European version of the Second World War, but very little about, none really from a Japanese perspective, and very little about the bomb and the atomic bombs and the aftermath, so I had absolutely no idea, and I think that's probably felt like the most revelatory part of the film, actually. Yeah.
I think there were lots of, because Meg went to school in Japan, but there were lots of aspects that we were like, oh my God, we couldn't believe that we didn't actually know that, or knew very little about, the 7 years of American occupation in Japan after the war, for example, the press code, the ABCC as well, which was essentially a sort of study, an American study of the survivors for the illnesses and ailments that developed, but was really just a study of them, not to work out how to treat them, and it wasn't about treating them, it was just looking at what happened to them and bringing them into hospital and doing tests on them.
I'd really encourage you to watch it more than once, because I think the first time you watch it you're just going, my God, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that, and you're just catching up with yourself, and then every time I watch it you you see more about it, you feel more. It's almost too much in one. You know, there's too much for an audience to do. You know, we're going from 0 to 100.
You talked about the duty of care. They emerge with incredible dignity. That's to me the highest you could give it.
Yeah, and edited in a similar way.
It's the 80th anniversary next year, isn't it? But were there any thoughts to hold it back until then?
Yes, this is called not being able to wait for Christmas to open your presents. We will show it again next year, but we just felt it's an amazing film. The contributors are old, and we wanted to put it out whilst everybody was still with us.
I think there's that sense, again, that prescience, that feeling of urgency, and also when you've made a film and you don't want to sit on it for another year, and it will go out on the anniversary, the 79th anniversary. Yeah. And, you know, why do we place so much significance on the decades or, you know, the 25 years or, you know, I mean, the fact is it's a significant story now that we haven't heard, and we were really pleased with the decision to bring the TX forward.
The beautiful thing for us now on iPlayer is that single films have a really long life on iPlayer, and they resurface every time there's a sort of either an important anniversary or something else has happened in the news. We can resurface it, and it gets a whole new audience. So by putting it out now, it will have sort of 4, 5, 6 waves of audiences, which I think will be, you know, will really benefit it. But yes, the schedulers said the same to us. Anybody else?
Thank you. It's really beautiful film and like such an important document, I think, that's been made. So well done, everyone. What struck me about your descriptions of the production process was just how much time everyone on the team was spending with this really traumatic content, whether that was with the people themselves going to the locations or with the edit material for, you know, days and days watching this. And I just wondered, and also from a commissioner point of view, you know, re-watching the film over and over, do you guys have any kind of practices that you use or kind of processes to work with traumatic material, or when you're working with trauma in interviews that you could share?
Really good question. Who wants to start? And we have run out of time, so short and snappy if you can.
Practices, I mean, that's quite hard. I think this is what was perhaps a little bit unique about this, is that they were, on the recce, we were surprised at how forthcoming they were about it, actually, and how often they would just launch into their stories of the day, unprompted. So in some ways, sort of getting them into that place wasn't as hard as it appears, you know. In terms of us dealing with it, I think, I mean, I don't know about that. That's sort of lots of yoga. I mean,
Well, we talked about you getting out of the edit suite every so often and going for a walk in the middle of the day. I mean, that was about it.
Did we do that?
Also, what did you?
I mean, you know, you can take breaks. Like, you can take breaks, and that's the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
Probably industry-wide, there's probably like not enough attention paid to that. I would probably say, like, if I'm being really honest, like, I've worked on quite a lot of traumatic things, and it takes its toll. But that being said, that is also the name of the game.
And then I have to say, the experience of being with these people, and I hope it comes through in the film, was that they were just like full of joy and so happy. And maybe that's because they've been through what they've been through and they've got this perspective on life. So, you know, it really did not feel like a sort of traumatic production.
It's interesting how a traumatic subject can actually, when you make a film about it, can be a very positive experience, because when people want you to be there and want to tell their stories, and it feels like a real privilege. And, you know, I've made lots of films about very difficult subjects, and that people might consider very difficult subjects, and people say, oh God, it must be really, you know, hard and awful. And I think, well, no, it's a privilege, and actually you're kind of doing something which feels hopefully meaningful that they're part of. And I always feel that this story is being told, it's not just being absorbed into us as the filmmaker, it's being absorbed into the camera, and then it's being shared more widely, and it feels that there's a purpose in that. you know, and I think from that you get some kind of, you know, that's why we do this, you know, as well. And we do offer psych support, I would say, to people who are working on our heavy productions.
Yeah.
It's a fair point. I think editors are often missed out of that, you know. So, yeah, something to think about.
Feeling that purpose and why you do it, I think that's a brilliant place to end. So thank you. Just to remind you, the premiere is tonight at 8:45 at the showroom. I think it's sold out, but I hope some of you are going to go. But before that, we've got the Docs Download Drinks, which I think are downstairs, where this brilliant team are going to be there. The rest of the commissioners in BBC Docs will be there. Commissioners from across Unscripted, the BBC will be there, and other heads of talent from all around the industry. So I really hope you can join us downstairs. But before we go, please join me in thanking our panel.